The morning air smelled of coffee, rain, and roses. Inside Petal and Pine, the little flower shop on Main Street, Ethan Brooks was already at work, hands steady, mind calm, arranging lilies and peonies with the care of a craftsman. For Ethan, flowers were more than decoration. They were language, quiet, beautiful words spoken without sound. He'd been running the shop since his mother passed, carrying on her motto, "Every bloom carries a blessing, even for those who don't deserve it yet." He smiled faintly at that thought, just as the bell above the door jingled. In stepped a woman in a spotless white designer coat, sunglasses despite the cloudy day, holding a clipboard like a weapon. "Excuse me," she called sharply. "Is anyone here?" Ethan wiped his hands on a towel and approached. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" The woman sighed. "I'm getting married this Saturday. My florist canceled at the last minute. I was told you're the only one in town who can handle a full wedding order on short notice." Ethan nodded. "We'll do everything we can. Congratulations, by the way." She didn't smile. "Just show me what you've got. I need elegance, not whatever country arrangements you make for funerals." He blinked, taken aback but still calm. "Of course. What's your name, ma'am?" "Victoria Lane," she said proudly. "You might have heard of me. My father owns the Lane Hotel downtown. We're hosting the wedding there." Ethan nodded politely. "I see. That's a beautiful venue." "Yes, it will be, if the flowers aren't a disaster." She looked around critically, wrinkling her nose. "This place smells earthy." "It's a flower shop," Ethan said with a gentle smile. "That tends to happen." She didn't laugh. "I just need roses, white and blush. Maybe hydrangeas if you have them. And they'd better not look cheap." Ethan's hands paused slightly over the stems. "Our flowers are fresh, not cheap. I'll make sure they're perfect for your day." Victoria crossed her arms. "Good. Because if they're not, I'll make sure everyone knows." When she left, Ethan exhaled slowly. His assistant, Lena, poked her head out from the back. "Wow, what a ray of sunshine." Ethan chuckled softly. "She's just nervous. Big day coming up." Lena frowned. "Big day or not, that woman was rude. You're still going to take the job?" He looked at the scattered petals on his table. "Of course. She deserves beautiful flowers, same as anyone else. Even after the way she talked to you?" He smiled faintly. "Especially after." That night, Ethan stayed late, sketching floral arrangements by the light of a single lamp. He didn't know why, but something about that bride, her tension, her pride, made him want to make this one perfect. Not for her approval, but because he believed beauty could soften even the hardest hearts. As he placed the last rose into a vase, he whispered to himself, "Every bloom carries a blessing, even if she doesn't see it yet." By Wednesday morning, Ethan Brooks's flower shop looked like a garden exploded. Buckets of roses, vases of lilies, crates of baby's breath crowding every counter. The faint hum of the cooler mixed with the soft rustle of petals. He worked with quiet precision, trimming stems and arranging bouquets, each one a small piece of art. Victoria Lane, however, wasn't interested in art, only perfection. She swept into the shop that afternoon like a storm in heels, followed by her assistant, who trailed behind juggling coffee and fabric swatches. "Mr. Brooks," she said sharply, "I hope you're on schedule." Ethan looked up from his table, calm as ever. "Good afternoon, Ms. Lane." "Yes, everything's going smoothly. Your main bouquet's almost done. I wanted to make sure the shades of blush matched your theme before finalizing the centerpieces." Victoria peered at the bouquet, frowning. The roses are nice, but those filler flowers, what are they?" "Wax flowers," he said. "They add texture and depth. They'll make the roses stand out more." "They make it look cheap," she snapped. "Remove them." Ethan nodded politely. "Of course." Lena, from behind the counter, muttered under her breath, "You'll regret that when your arrangement looks flat." Victoria turned sharply. "What was that?" Ethan stepped in smoothly. "Nothing, ma'am. My assistant was just reminding me to update the invoice for your changes." Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. After she left, Lena threw up her hands. "How do you stay so calm? I'd have thrown her out by now." Ethan smiled faintly. "You can't fight pride with pride, Lena. Flowers don't bloom because you yell at them." Lena rolled her eyes. "Well, she's not a flower, Ethan. She's a weed." He chuckled softly. "Even weeds have roots." You just have to understand where they grow. On Friday evening, the night before the wedding, Ethan and Lena loaded up the van with hundreds of stems, dozens of arrangements, and one flawless bridal bouquet. The storm clouds above looked heavy, but he didn't worry. He'd checked the forecast. Only light rain was expected. They arrived at the Lane Hotel, where preparations were in full swing. Staff running around, decorators adjusting lights, the string quartet tuning their instruments. Victoria stood in the middle of it all, clipboard in hand, barking orders like a general. Ribbons higher. No, white candles, not cream. Who approved these chairs? Ethan approached quietly, holding the bouquet box. Ms. Lane, we're here with the flowers. She turned, clearly stressed. Finally. Please tell me they're not wilted. He opened the box slowly. Inside lay her bridal bouquet. White roses wrapped in soft silk ribbon, delicate sprigs of eucalyptus framing each bloom, subtle blush tones that glowed under the ballroom lights. For the first time, Victoria went silent. Her eyes softened, only for a second. It's fine, she said curtly, though her voice trembled. You can set the rest up in the reception hall. Ethan smiled. Of course. As the night wore on, the ballroom transformed into something magical. Rows of ivory roses cascaded from the tables. Tall vases framed the dance floor like columns of living light. And in the center of it all, the bouquet, her bouquet, waited patiently in a crystal vase. Even Lena stopped to admire it. It's beautiful, she whispered. You outdid yourself. Ethan wiped his hands. Let's hope tomorrow goes just as smoothly. But when thunder rolled outside and lightning cracked across the sky, his smile faltered slightly. Storm's moving faster than expected, he murmured. Lena frowned. You think it'll hit tomorrow? He glanced toward the window. Sheets of rain already pounding the streets. Let's hope not. But just in case, I'll come early. If something happens to these flowers, I'll fix it myself. The next morning, the city woke to chaos. Power lines down, roads flooded, deliveries delayed. At the Lane Hotel, panic set in. Half the vendors were stuck outside town. The sound crew couldn't get through. Even the caterer's van was trapped on a washed-out street. And as if that weren't enough, the flowers for the outdoor ceremony, stored in the delivery tent, were soaked and ruined. Victoria stood in her wedding gown, staring at the drenched mess, her perfect day unraveling before her eyes. She buried her face in her hands. No, 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 no. And then, through the rain, she heard a familiar voice. Ms. Lane? She turned, and there was Ethan, raincoat drenched, pushing a cart of fresh flowers through the mud, his hands steady, his eyes calm. I brought extras, he said simply. Let's fix this. The rain fell in thick, relentless sheets as guests huddled under umbrellas outside the Lane Hotel. The once picturesque garden ceremony was now a puddle of chaos. Toppled chairs, soaked tablecloths, wilted decorations. The white arch that was supposed to frame the couple's vows sagged pitifully under the weight of the storm. And in the middle of it all stood Victoria Lane, drenched veil plastered to her face, her perfect curls undone, her voice trembling. This is ruined, she whispered, staring at the mess. It's completely ruined. Then she heard it again, that calm, steady voice. Not yet, ma'am. She turned. Through the gray haze of rain, Ethan Brooks appeared, pushing a cart covered by a waterproof tarp. His jacket was soaked, his boots caked with mud, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. Mr. Brooks, she gasped. What are you? I thought everything was destroyed. He lifted the tarp. Beneath it were rows of fresh blooms, roses, hydrangeas, eucalyptus, dahlias, all vibrant and untouched. I made extras, he said simply. Backup stock, in case something went wrong. My mother used to say, never trust a forecast when love is on the line. Victoria stared, speechless. You did all this? Ethan nodded. Let's get to work. We can still make this beautiful. Within minutes, he and his assistant Lena were moving with lightning speed. Ethan cut stems, built new bouquets on the spot, and began reassembling the ruined arch under a makeshift canopy. Bring me those fresh roses, he shouted over the rain. Lena, tie down the ribbon, double knot. Guests peeked out from the hotel doors, watching in awe as the soaked florist rebuilt the wedding from scratch. Even the band members started helping, holding poles, moving tables, anything to keep things upright. The storm raged, but somehow, in the middle of it all, something beautiful began to take shape again. Victoria stood under the awning, her breath catching as she watched him. This man she'd dismissed, insulted, and looked down upon was now saving her wedding. Without complaint, without resentment, just focus and grace. She stepped forward. Mr. Brooks. He looked up from where he was wiring flowers to the arch. She swallowed hard. Let me help. He smiled softly. You'll ruin your dress. It's already ruined, she said, kneeling beside him. Might as well make it worth something. For the first time that day, he laughed. Together they began rebuilding, her holding the flowers steady, him securing them with wire, both soaked to the bone. By the time the rain finally eased, the garden had transformed. The once ruined arch now bloomed with fresh life. White roses, green ivy, and pale pink blossoms glowing against the silver sky. Puddles sparkled on the cobblestone path, reflecting the petals scattered like confetti. Victoria looked around in disbelief. It was different from what she'd planned. Raw, imperfect, real. She turned to Ethan, voice soft. It's beautiful. He wiped his wet hands on a towel and smiled. Sometimes the most beautiful things come after the storm. Her eyes met his, full of gratitude. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for how I spoke to you before. You didn't deserve that. Ethan nodded gently. You were under pressure. It happens. She shook her head. No, it doesn't excuse me. You didn't just save my wedding. You saved my faith in people. The ceremony went on, smaller but more heartfelt. Guests cried as Victoria and her husband exchanged vows under Ethan's flowers, blooms that had survived the storm. And when she threw her bouquet into the air at the end of the night, it wasn't just tradition. It was a symbol of gratitude, of change, of beauty, reborn. The bouquet landed in Lena's arms, and she laughed, shouting, Guess I'm next. Ethan just smiled from the edge of the crowd, quietly proud. Later that night, as the last guests left, Victoria approached him one more time. She held out an envelope. I know what I said about cheap flowers, she said. I was wrong. No amount of money could have bought what you gave me today. He opened the envelope. Not a check, but a handwritten note. To the man who turned disaster into beauty. Thank you for reminding me what love and grace really look like. Ethan looked up, eyes shining. Thank you, Ms. Lane. Please, she said, smiling genuinely for the first time. Call me Victoria. 2 weeks after the wedding, the town had returned to its usual rhythm. The rain long gone, the sun warm and steady again. But inside Petal and Pine, something had changed. There was a new energy in the air. Customers came in mentioning the miracle wedding, saying they'd heard about the florist who saved the Lane ceremony in a downpour. Ethan just smiled, brushing it off. Just did what needed doing, he'd say, arranging lilies like it was any other day. Then, one quiet afternoon, the bell above the door jingled. When he looked up, he almost didn't recognize her. Victoria Lane, no longer the picture of perfection in high heels and diamonds, stood there in jeans and a simple sweater, hair tied back, a paper bag from the cafe in one hand. Mr. Brooks, she said softly, smiling. I brought you coffee. I figured you could use a break. Ethan blinked, surprised. Ms. Lane, Victoria, she corrected gently. He nodded, accepting the cup. Thank you, that's unexpected. I could say the same, she said, glancing around at the shop filled with fresh blooms. I still can't believe what you pulled off that day. My guests are still talking about it. Honestly, I think your flowers stole the show. He chuckled. I hope not. It was your wedding, after all. She smiled faintly. Maybe. But it wasn't just the flowers. It was you. The way you stayed calm when everything fell apart. I've been thinking about it ever since. Ethan's brow softened. It wasn't heroism. It was just faith. I've seen storms before, and I've seen what can grow after them. Victoria looked down, her voice quieter. You know, when I first came in here, I thought you were beneath me. Just some florist who didn't understand my world. He didn't respond, just waited, his patience as steady as ever. I was wrong, she said, looking up. You understand it better than I do. You build beauty from broken things. I only ever tried to buy it. Ethan smiled gently. Everyone learns at their own pace. They sat by the counter, sipping coffee while the scent of roses filled the room. Victoria asked about his work, the shop, his mother, the small local weddings he did for free when couples couldn't afford decor. You give away flowers? She asked, surprised. Ethan shrugged. People remember kindness longer than they remember prices. She laughed softly. That's something my father never believed. Maybe he never met the right florist, Ethan said with a playful grin. Victoria smiled, shaking her head. You're impossible. A week later, she came again, this time with a sketchbook. I've been thinking, she said. My husband and I want to do something meaningful with the extra money from the wedding budget. I was wondering if you'd help me design a small public garden, something beautiful for everyone, not just people who can pay for it. Ethan looked up from trimming stems, eyes lighting up. A garden? You mean it? She nodded. You showed me what beauty means. I want to pass that on. For the first time, Ethan didn't have words. He just smiled, the kind of smile that started in his heart and reached his eyes. Months later, the Lane Brooks Community Garden opened on the edge of town, a place filled with color and life. Rows of roses, lilies, and wildflowers, grown by volunteers from all walks of life. There were benches, paths, and a small plaque near the gate that read, Born from the Storm, a reminder that grace blooms in unlikely places. At the opening ceremony, Victoria turned to Ethan and whispered, You didn't just save my wedding, Ethan. You changed my life. He looked out at the smiling families, the children running through the flower beds, the sun glowing over the petals. No, he said softly. You did. You just needed a little help finding the soil. She smiled at him, and for the first time since her wedding, it wasn't the smile of a woman trying to look perfect. It was the smile of someone finally at peace. Summer came early that year, painting the small town in sunlight and the faint hum of bees. The Lane Brooks Community Garden had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Roses climbing trellises, lavender swaying gently in the wind, and children laughing as they chased butterflies between the flower beds. For Ethan Brooks, it was more than a garden. It was a living testament, proof that something beautiful could grow from brokenness. He still opened his flower shop every morning, still arranged bouquets and listened to people's stories. But now, every afternoon, he'd stop by the garden, not as a florist, but as a caretaker of hope. And Victoria was always there. She had traded her designer heels for sneakers, her clipboard for gardening gloves. The first time Ethan saw her kneeling in the dirt, planting seedlings beside a group of schoolchildren, he had to bite back a smile. When she noticed him watching, she stood and brushed the soil from her jeans. You're staring, Mr. Brooks, he grinned. Just admiring your technique. Not every day you see a Lane planting petunias. She laughed, rolling her eyes. Careful. I'm getting pretty good at this. I'll believe it when I see those flowers bloom, he teased. Oh, they will, she said confidently, because I finally learned that beautiful things don't just appear. They're built, bit by bit with patience. He nodded approvingly. Now that's something my mother would have said. Over the next few months, the garden became the town's heart. Couples got engaged there. Retirees came to read under the oak tree. Children who used to wander the streets aimlessly now came after school to water plants and learn about growth. Local newspapers ran stories. Bride and florist turned storm disaster into community miracle. Victoria would always laugh when she saw the headlines. They make it sound like I was a saint, she said one afternoon, sitting beside Ethan on a bench surrounded by lilies. You're not, he said with a smirk. Hardly, she replied, smiling, but maybe I'm learning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the two of them sat in comfortable silence. Fireflies flickered through the air, tiny lanterns among the petals. Funny thing, Victoria said quietly. I used to think the perfect life was about control, having everything exactly how you planned it. But that storm, it wrecked everything I thought mattered. And somehow, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Ethan looked at her, his voice soft. Storms tend to do that. They wash away what's false, so what's real can finally grow. She met his gaze. You always talk like that. Like everything's poetry. He chuckled. When you work with flowers, you start to believe the world has a rhythm, even in chaos. They sat there side by side, watching the last light fade from the sky. The air smelled like roses and rain, the scent of endings and beginnings. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the garden early. On the bench where they'd sat the night before, he found something waiting for him. A small vase filled with white lilies and a handwritten note. For the man who taught me that beauty isn't bought, it's grown. Thank you for planting something I'll never forget. Victoria. He smiled, reading it twice, then tucked the note into his jacket pocket. The garden around him shimmered in the morning light, dew clinging to every petal. Children's laughter echoed from the gate as the first visitors arrived. Ethan took a deep breath and whispered almost to himself, "Every bloom carries a blessing, even for those who don't deserve it yet." He smiled. Guess she deserved it after all. And as the sun rose higher, lighting up the flowers they'd planted together, Ethan Brooks realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, the seeds we plant for others are the ones that change us the most. Because the storm that wrecked a wedding had done more than save a single day. It had sown the roots of forgiveness, kindness, and love. And from that day on, the little flower shop and the garden it inspired became a story people told whenever they needed to believe again that no heart is too proud to soften and no storm too strong to stop something beautiful from blooming.